Hey everyone. So this week we're going to talk about the Semitic cultural hearth, and we're going to look about the rise of Abrahamic religions, which are the three religions which predominate our region of North Africa and Southwest Asia. Now we're going to begin with Judaism, then look at Christianity, and then discuss a little bit of the spread of Islam across these terrains. Okay, so about 4,000 years ago, we can track the rise of Judaism. Now we have it through the embodiment of a very particularly important person, and this happens to be Abraham. So we look at Abraham coming, from Ur, or the lands around Ur in southern Iraq, and relocating to the lands of Canaan, which we see in Phoenicia over here. Okay, so after that, we have a settlement for a while in the lands of Canaan, until eventually, through the descendants of Abraham, we have a period of captivity and existence in the lower Egypt Valley, in the Levant area, which is essentially this zone right here. We're all familiar probably with the some of the captivity stories and the relationship with Moses and how the Israelites find their way back to the Levant. Now, eventually, through this lineage, we see the personage of David and the armies of Israelites, the ancient Israelites, and the conquest of Jerusalem to kind of retake that land. Now they do suffer from some of the bullying of other polities for a while. We have the strength of the mighty Assyrians, who lay siege to Jerusalem, but they don't necessarily sack it. We later have, the captivity of Babylon, where actually Nebuchadnezzar, they lay siege actually to Jerusalem, and they take away in the Babylonian exile. We say some of the anywhere from thousands of the city elites, so the literates, the scholars, the craftspeoples, various forms of artisans and linguists, maybe people who have some more money and means, or people of status within the society. So they go back to Babylon for quite a while. You guys are familiar with Rivers of Babylon, this song. You can listen to some of these things. These are also taken from Ezekiel and Jeremiah in the Old Testament. Okay, so we have the conquest of Iranian peoples and Cyrus, and these uniting of some of the Median tribes and some of these Turkic peoples in the eastern portion of Iran. And what they do is they sack the existent Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, which had been very, very strong, and it actually had only within the last several centuries usurped the Assyrian hegemony. So Cyrus now rules Babylon, has a different relationship with the captive Jewish peoples, sets many of them free. We're familiar with the story of Daniel at this time. This isn't an exegesis class, but we can kind of get a sense of how this has an impact upon the future of these types of Abrahamic religions. So we have people's a lot of people coming back to Israel, some people staying in Babylon, and we can kind of look at this multi-centered world a little bit in the ancient world, but not for the purposes of our study. Let's just play it a little bit forward, where you have the continued rule of Jerusalem. I think it's overseen by the overlordship of the Greek dynasties of the time, as the expanding Hellenic world is vastly increased by the conquest of Alexander. So we have the death of a young Alexander on his way back home from his conquest into the subcontinent of India. And then we have the passing on down of the land to his generals, known as the Diadochi. So we see Israel come under the sway and the rulership of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Ptolemy was one of the generals of Alexander. Eventually, the Ptolemaic dynasty falls into discord with another former Alexandrian general, the Seleucids, who were the farthest eastern example, and they absorbed a lot of the old Babylonian, language groups, and old, from the Persians to the Babylonians, and they were speaking Greek. And they also had a lot of Indian and South Asian influence as well. So this was a very multilingual polyglot, and this influenced a lot of the development of, basically the pre-Hasmonean Judea. So anyways, you look at, eventually you have the Hasmonean dynasty arises, and people might be familiar with Herod and the Herodian dynasty, and you have the increase of the lands of, back reconquering Judah and going all the way up into Galilee and Samaria, and some of these other places that had been a little bit closer to Tyre and where it had been Proto-Assyrian types of domains. So anyways, we don't have that large an expansionary state. It later, falls under the dominion of the Romans as the Romans defeat Carthage in the Punic Wars of North Africa and essentially gain dominion to the Mediterranean world. And eventually, the Hasmoneans had originally invited in the Romans to kind of be a buffer to some of the Grecian expansion, but when the Romans defeat the Seleucids without much of a fight, they basically become the hegemon in the area. So Israel kind of becomes a client state again and is soon annexed as part of a Roman province. And this takes us all the way up to about the first century BC, and we're going to transition a little bit more into the discussion of Christianity. Because we have a Roman-controlled Israel, which is Palestine, as a Roman province. We have the birth of Christ in about 4 BC. Now, let's take a brief pause for a moment.